The hardest dollar you'll ever save is the first one, not because you don't understand math, not because you lack discipline, but because when you're starting with nothing, every sacrifice feels infinite and every gain feels invisible. Charlie Munger understood this better than most. He once said that getting to your first $100,000 is a mathematical and psychological battle that breaks most people before they ever reach the finish line. And he was right, because the early years of wealth building aren't about intelligence or strategy. They're about endurance, about showing up when the numbers barely move, about trusting a process that rewards you tomorrow for pain you feel today. Disclaimer: the content you're about to hear is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not financial advice, and it should not be considered a recommendation to buy or sell any security or investment. Always consult with a qualified financial professional before making any investment decisions. Charlie Munger died at 99 years old. He lived long enough to see his fortune reach billions, long enough to watch Berkshire Hathaway become one of the most successful investment vehicles in history, long enough to mentor thousands of investors who hung on his every word. But if you go back to the beginning, to the years before he partnered with Warren Buffett, you'll find a man who struggled just like everyone else. A man who worked as a lawyer, who lived modestly, who scraped together capital one paycheck at a time, and who, at one point, looked at his bank account and realized that the journey from $0 to $100,000 felt longer than the journey from 100,000 to 1,000,000 ever would. He wasn't exaggerating. The first 100,000 is the loneliest climb in personal finance. It's where compound interest is too weak to feel, where every emergency wipes out months of progress, where you watch others spend freely while you skip vacations, drive old cars, and live beneath your means. It's where doubt whispers loudest, where you wonder if sacrifice is worth it, where the gap between effort and reward feels cruel, and it's precisely this gap that separates those who build wealth from those who never do. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Wealth is not built by brilliance. It's built by boring repetition, by saving when you don't want to, by investing when markets feel uncertain, by ignoring the noise and letting time do what time does best. Munger knew this. He didn't rely on shortcuts. He didn't chase hot stocks or try to time the market. He simply understood that the first 100,000 wasn't about getting rich. It was about proving to yourself that you could delay gratification long enough to let mathematics take over, and mathematics, once it takes over, is unstoppable. When you have nothing, saving $5,000 feels monumental. It might take a year, maybe longer. You sacrifice. You budget. You say no to things you want. And at the end of that year, you look at your account and see $5,000. It feels good. But it doesn't feel transformative because $5,000 in the grand scheme of financial security is still fragile. One medical bill, one car repair, one unexpected expense, and it's gone. So you start again and again, and the psychological weight of that cycle, the feeling that you're running in place, is what makes most people quit. But here's what changes when you cross $100,000. The math shifts. Suddenly, your money starts working harder than you do. A 10% annual return on $100,000 is $10,000. That's real money. That's money that pays for trips, covers emergencies, or gets reinvested to accelerate growth. Compare that to 10% on $10,000. $1,000. Meaningful, yes, but not life-changing. Not yet. The difference between these two scenarios isn't just numerical, it's psychological. Once your investments start generating returns that rival your salary, you stop feeling like you're fighting alone. You have a partner, and that partner is compound interest. Munger understood this better than anyone. He wasn't born wealthy. He wasn't handed a trust fund or gifted a portfolio. He built his wealth the same way most people do, slowly, patiently, and with an almost obsessive focus on avoiding stupidity. He once said that it's not about being brilliant, it's about not being dumb. And nowhere is that wisdom more applicable than in the journey to your first 100,000. Let's get practical. The reason the first 100,000 is so hard is threefold. First, you're fighting human nature. Your brain is wired for immediate gratification. It wants the new phone, the nice dinner, the weekend trip. Saving money feels like punishment, like denying yourself pleasure for some abstract future benefit. And when that future benefit is years away, your brain rebels. It tells you to live a little, to enjoy today, to stop being so uptight about money. And most people listen. They spend what they earn, they justify it, they convince themselves they'll start saving next year, and next year never comes. Second, you're fighting time. When you're young, time feels infinite. You think you have decades to figure things out, to catch up, to get serious about money. But time is the one resource you can never get back. And the longer you wait to start saving, the harder it becomes. Because compound interest doesn't care about your intentions, it only cares about duration. The difference between starting at 25 and starting at 45 isn't just 20 years of contributions. It's 20 years of compounding. And that gap, once created, is almost impossible to close. Third, you're fighting mathematics. Small amounts of money grow slowly, painfully slowly. When you're saving a few $100s a month, it takes years to reach meaningful milestones. And during those years, life happens. Emergencies arise, temptations surface, doubts creep in. The journey feels endless. And without a clear understanding of why you're sacrificing, without a deep belief that this will eventually pay off, it's easy to give up. But here's what Munger taught, both through his words and his life. The people who win aren't the smartest. They're the most patient. They're the ones who understand that getting to $100,000 isn't about genius. It's about showing up every month, every year, rain or shine, bull market or bear market. They save, they invest, they ignore the noise, and they trust the process. And eventually, the process rewards them. Let's talk about what happens after you cross that first 100,000. Because this is where the story gets interesting. This is where the compounding curve starts to bend in your favor. This is where patience transforms from a virtue into a superpower. Once you hit 100,000, the next 100,000 comes faster. Not because you're saving more, though you might be. Not because you're taking bigger risks, though some do, but because your capital base is large enough that growth becomes self-sustaining. If you're earning 10% a year, you're generating $10,000 in returns. Reinvest that, and now you're compounding on 110,000. The next year, you're compounding on 121,000, and so on. The snowball effect that felt theoretical when you had $10,000 becomes tangible. When you have 100,000, you can see it, you can feel it, and that changes everything. It changes your relationship with money. When you're broke, every dollar feels precious. You hoard it. You obsess over it. You feel guilty spending it. But when you have $100,000 invested, you start to relax. Not because you're rich, you're not, but because you've crossed a psychological threshold. You've proven to yourself that you can build wealth, that you have discipline, that you're not doomed to live paycheck to paycheck forever, and that confidence, that quiet assurance, allows you to make better decisions. You stop panicking during downturns. You stop chasing fads. You stop second-guessing your strategy. You simply stay the course. It also changes your timeline. When you're starting from zero, retirement feels impossibly far away. 30 years, 40 years. It's abstract, but once you have $100,000, you can do the math. You can project forward. You can see with reasonable certainty what that 100,000 will become if you just leave it alone. And what you realize is this: the hardest part is over, not because you're done saving, you're not, but because the trajectory is set, the foundation is built. Now, it's just a matter of letting time work. Munger often spoke about the importance of surviving long enough to benefit from compounding. He said that the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. And he meant it, because the real danger, once you've built momentum, is doing something stupid, taking on too much risk, chasing returns, getting greedy, panicking during a downturn and selling at the bottom. These are the mistakes that destroy wealth, not slowly, quickly, catastrophically. And they're mistakes that people with $100,000 are just as vulnerable to as people with $10,000, maybe more vulnerable, because once you have something to lose. And the fear of losing it can make you irrational. It can make you conservative when you should be patient, or aggressive when you should be cautious. It can make you doubt the very strategy that got you here. And that's where Munger's wisdom becomes essential. He understood that the key to wealth isn't just building it, it's keeping it. And keeping it requires a combination of discipline, humility, and an almost stubborn refusal to deviate from proven principles. Avoid debt. Avoid drama. Avoid dumb risks. That was Munger's mantra, and it's especially relevant after you've crossed the $100,000 threshold. Because at that point, the biggest threat to your wealth isn't the market. It's you, your ego, your impatience, your desire to prove you're smarter than everyone else. Munger spent decades watching brilliant people make idiotic mistakes. He watched them leverage up at the wrong time, chase speculative bubbles, abandon their strategy after one bad quarter, and he saw again and again that the ones who survived weren't the geniuses. They were the plotters, the ones who stuck to the basics, who lived within their means, who invested in quality, who did nothing when doing nothing was the smartest move. Survival beats brilliance. Let's pause here and consider what this means for someone in their 50s or 60s. Someone who's reading this and wondering if it's too late, if they've already missed their chance, if the first 100,000 is now an impossible dream. And the answer, uncomfortable as it may be, is both yes and no. Yes, time is shorter. Yes, the compounding curve is less forgiving. Yes, mistakes are more costly. But no, it's not too late, because the principles don't change. The math doesn't change. What changes is urgency. When you're 30, you can afford to be leisurely about saving. When you're 55, you can't. You need to be aggressive, not with risk, with discipline. You need to save more, cut deeper, focus harder, because the runway is shorter, but the runway still exists. And here's something most people don't realize. Getting to $100,000 in your 50s is still transformative, not because it will make you rich, it won't, but because it will give you options. It will give you a cushion. It will give you the ability to make decisions based on what's right, not just what's necessary. And in the final decades of life, when health and energy become uncertain, options are everything. Munger lived to 99. He spent the last third of his life watching his wealth compound into amounts that would have seemed absurd when he was starting out. But he never forgot what it felt like to struggle, to wonder if he was doing the right thing, to question whether the sacrifice was worth it. And in his later years, when people asked him for advice, he always came back to the same idea. Get to the first 100,000, however you can, as fast as you can. Because once you're there, the game changes. The game changes because your psychology changes. You stop thinking like someone who's broke. You start thinking like someone who's building something. And that shift, subtle as it sounds, is profound. It affects how you spend, how you invest, how you think about risk, how you handle adversity. It gives you confidence, not arrogance. Confidence. The quiet kind, the kind that comes from knowing you've done hard things before and you can do them again. Here's the hard part, the part nobody likes to talk about. Most people never get there. Most people spend what they earn. They finance cars. They carry credit card balances. They convince themselves they'll start saving when they make more money. And they never do. Because the problem isn't income, it's behavior. It's the inability to delay gratification, to live below your means, to prioritize future security over present comfort, and no amount of financial education will fix that. Because it's not an information problem, it's a discipline problem. Munger knew this. He knew that you can teach someone the principles of investing in an afternoon, but you can't teach them patience. You can't teach them discipline. You can't teach them the ability to sit still and do nothing while everyone around them is chasing the next big thing. Those are character traits, and they're either developed over time or they're not. So, if you're reading this and you're discouraged, if you feel like you're behind, if you look at your bank account and see a number that feels inadequate, here's what I want you to understand. The first 100,000 is supposed to be hard. It's supposed to feel like a slog. It's supposed to test you. Because wealth isn't a reward for intelligence, it's a reward for endurance, for showing up, for continuing to save and invest even when it feels pointless, even when the numbers barely move, even when everyone around you is spending freely and you're sitting at home eating leftovers and driving a 15-year-old car. That's the price. And most people aren't willing to pay it. But you can be different. You can be the exception. You can be the one who looks at the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And instead of despairing, you get to work. You create a plan. You automate your savings. You invest consistently. You cut out the noise. You ignore the trends. You focus on what you can control. And you trust that if you just keep going, if you just give it enough time, the math will eventually work in your favor, because it will. It always does. Not for everyone, but for the ones who last. Let's return to Munger one more time, because his life wasn't just about money. It was about philosophy, about how to think, about how to live. And one of the things he believed most deeply was that simplicity wins, that the best investment strategy isn't complicated. It's boring. Save money, invest in quality, reinvest dividends, hold for decades. Don't do stupid things. That's it. That's the whole formula. And yet, despite its simplicity, almost nobody follows it. Because simplicity requires patience. And patience is the rarest commodity in modern life. Munger watched people complicate investing. They bought options. They traded frequently. They chased narratives. They convinced themselves they had an edge. And he watched them lose. Not occasionally, consistently. Because complexity doesn't generate returns. It generates fees. It generates stress. It generates mistakes. Simplicity, on the other hand, generates wealth, slowly, quietly, inevitably. And that's what the first 100,000 teaches you. That wealth isn't built through cleverness. It's built through consistency, through showing up, through doing the boring work that nobody else wants to do, through delaying gratification, through living like nobody else so that later you can live like nobody else. By the time you're 60, the margin for error is gone. You can't afford to take wild risks. You can't afford to start over. You can't afford to learn expensive lessons. What you can afford to do is follow proven principles. Save aggressively, invest wisely, protect what you've built, and let time do the rest. Because time, if you give it enough runway, is the most powerful force in investing. More powerful than intelligence, more powerful than timing, more powerful than strategy. Time is the great equalizer, and the only way to harness it is to start. Not tomorrow, not next month, not when things settle down. Now, today, with whatever you have, even if it's small, even if it feels insignificant, because small amounts invested consistently over time become large amounts. That's not theory. That's mathematics. That's history. That's how every fortune that wasn't inherited or stolen was built. And here's the beautiful part. Once you reach that first 100,000, once you cross that threshold and feel the momentum shift, you look back and realize something. The struggle wasn't wasted. The sacrifice wasn't for nothing. Every dollar you saved, every expense you cut, every temptation you resisted, it all mattered. It all compounded, not just financially, psychologically. You became someone who could delay gratification, who could think long-term, who could endure discomfort for future reward. And those traits, once developed, are yours forever. They'll serve you in every area of life, not just investing, relationships, health, career. Because the ability to think beyond the next week, the next month, the next year, that's what separates people who thrive from people who merely survive. And it's what Munger embodied. He wasn't just wealthy, he was wise. And his wisdom came from understanding that success isn't about winning quickly. It's about not losing, about protecting your downside, about surviving long enough to benefit from the upside. So what changes after the first 100,000? Everything and nothing. Everything. Because the trajectory shifts, the compounding accelerates, the psychological burden lifts, the confidence grows, the options expand. You stop feeling like you're fighting an uphill battle and start feeling like gravity is working in your favor. Nothing. Because the principles remain the same. You still need to save. You still need to invest. You still need to avoid stupidity. You still need to be patient. The numbers get bigger, but the discipline required doesn't change. In fact, it becomes more important. Because the bigger your portfolio gets, the more painful mistakes become. A 10% loss on $10,000 is $1,000. Painful, but recoverable. A 10% loss on $500,000 is $50,000. That's a year of living expenses, maybe more. That's not something you bounce back from easily. And this is where Munger's final lesson becomes essential. Wealth isn't just about accumulation. It's about preservation. It's about knowing when to stop, when to take risk off the table, when to shift from growth to safety, when to accept that enough is enough. Because the race to get rich can destroy you if you don't know when to stop running. And many people, once they get a taste of wealth, can't stop. They keep chasing. They keep reaching. They keep telling themselves that just a little more will make them happy. And they lose everything. Munger avoided that trap. He made his fortune. He protected it. He enjoyed it. But he never let it define him. He never let it consume him. He understood that money is a tool, a means to an end. And the end isn't more money. It's freedom, peace, the ability to live life on your own terms, to spend time with people you love, to pursue interests that matter, to contribute to causes you believe in, to go to bed at night knowing that you're okay, that your family is okay, that the future, while uncertain, is manageable. That's what the first 100,000 buys you, not luxury, not status, but peace of mind. And once you have that, once you feel it, you'll wonder why you didn't start sooner, why you wasted years worrying instead of acting, why you let fear and doubt and distraction keep you from doing the one thing that would have solved most of your problems. Saving money. It's not complicated, it's just hard. And the reason it's hard isn't because the steps are difficult. It's because the reward is delayed. Because you have to trust a process you can't see. Because you have to believe that your future self will thank you for sacrifices your present self resents. And that kind of faith, that kind of long-term thinking, is rare. But you have it, or you can develop it. Because if you're still reading this, if you've made it this far, then you're already different. You're already someone who's willing to think beyond today, to consider tomorrow, to recognize that the choices you make now will echo for decades. And that recognition, that awareness, is the first step toward building wealth. The second step is action, not perfect action, just consistent action. Open an account, set up automatic transfers, invest in a simple index fund. And then do nothing. Let it sit. Let it grow. Let it compound. And resist, with every fiber of your being, the urge to tinker, to check it constantly, to second-guess yourself. Because the biggest threat to your wealth isn't the market, it's your own impatience. Munger said it best. The stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. And he was right. The people who win aren't the ones with the best strategies. They're the ones who can sit still, who can endure volatility without panicking, who can watch their portfolio drop 30% and do nothing, because they know with absolute certainty that time heals all wounds, that markets recover, that patience in the end always wins. So here's my challenge to you. Stop waiting. Stop making excuses. Stop telling yourself you'll start when things are easier, because things will never be easier. There will always be emergencies, always be expenses, always be reasons to delay. But if you let those reasons win, if you let them dictate your financial future, you'll reach 70 and realize you're in the same place you were at 50. And that's a regret you don't want to carry. Instead, make a decision today, right now, that you're going to get to $100,000, however long it takes, however hard it is. You're going to do it, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary, because it's the difference between a retirement spent worrying and a retirement spent living, between dependence and independence, between regret and peace. And when you get there, when you finally cross that threshold and see six figures in your account, you'll understand what Munger meant. You'll understand why the first 100,000 is the hardest. Not because the math is complicated, but because the person you have to become to earn it is someone you're not yet. Someone more disciplined, more patient, more focused, more resilient. And becoming that person requires you to shed the habits and beliefs and excuses that have kept you stuck. It requires transformation. And transformation is painful, but it's also liberating. Because on the other side of that pain is a version of you that's stronger, more capable, more confident, a version that's built, something real, something that can't be taken away, something that will compound and grow and provide for you long after you stop working. That's the promise of the first 100,000, not wealth, not riches, but security, stability, the foundation upon which everything else is built. And once you have it, once you feel it, you'll never look at money the same way again. You'll stop seeing it as something to spend and start seeing it as something to steward, to protect, to grow, not for its own sake, but for the freedom it provides, the peace it offers, the options it creates. This is the legacy Charlie Munger left behind. Not just billions of dollars, but a philosophy, a way of thinking, a framework for living that prioritizes long-term thinking over short-term gratification, that values patience over cleverness, that understands the difference between getting rich and staying rich, and that recognizes above all that wealth isn't measured by what you have. It's measured by what you don't need. So as we close this reflection, as we step back from the numbers and the strategies and the timelines, let's remember what this is really about. It's about dignity, about the ability to age with grace, to retire without fear, to live your final decades not in desperation, but in peace. It's about giving yourself the gift of options, of time, of freedom. And that gift, while it requires sacrifice today, is worth every ounce of effort you put into it. The first 100,000 is the hardest, but it's also the most important, because it's the one that proves you can, the one that transforms you from someone who talks about building wealth to someone who actually does it, the one that sets you on a trajectory that, if followed faithfully, will carry you further than you ever imagined. Charlie Munger knew this. He lived it. And in his 99 years, he proved that the greatest wealth isn't found in complexity. It's found in simplicity, in patience, in discipline, in the willingness to do boring things for a very long time. And if you can embrace that, if you can commit to it, then the first 100,000 isn't a dream. It's a milestone, one you'll reach, and one that will change everything. Trust the process, honor the sacrifice, and give yourself the time to become who you need to be. Because on the other side of that struggle is a peace that money can't buy, but that financial security makes possible. And that, more than any number in any account, is what makes the journey worth taking.